There's a song in this show that shouldn't feel this haunting, just a few notes, a soft love ballad from decades ago, but every time it plays, someone dies, and by the end of Human Vapor you start to wonder, is the song controlling the monster? Or is the monster just the last surviving piece of a man who never stopped waiting for someone to save him? Stick with me, because the real horror in this story isn't the man who turns into gas, it's who's been pulling his strings the entire time. Welcome back to Movizo, the channel where we don't just watch the ending, we take it apart. Today, we're breaking down Netflix's Human Vapor, the Japanese sci-fi thriller that starts as a murder mystery and slowly reveals itself to be something far more devastating. A story about what happens to people society decides are disposable. If you finished the series, you already know the twist, but there's a detail buried underneath it, one the show never says out loud, that changes how you should watch the entire finale. Let's dig in. Here's where it starts. On the surface, this looks like a classic detective story. Detective Kenji Okamoto and journalist Kyoko Kono are chasing down a killer who can turn his body into vapor and slip through walls, locks, and crime scenes like he was never there. But almost immediately, something feels off about the way these murders are chosen. They're too specific, too personal, almost like the vapor isn't picking targets at random, like something or someone is directing him. And that's the detail hiding in plain sight. The human vapor doesn't act, he obeys. Every kill in this show is a response to a wish, and once you notice that pattern, the entire investigation flips upside down. This was never a story about catching a monster, it's a story about finding out who's making the wishes. So let's rewind to who Ren Tsutsumida actually was before he became the human vapor at all. He wasn't some shadowy villain. He ran a small ramen shop. He took in a child named Kyoko after she escaped from a place called the White Center, an institution that claimed to shelter vulnerable people, but functioned more like a pipeline for exploitation. Ren raised her, protected her, and made a quiet deal to keep her out of her mother's custody. That's who this man was before any of this started. Then came the meteorite. The government needed cleanup crews for the crash site, and rather than risk public workers or media attention, they pulled laborers from the White Center, people with no families searching for them, no one who'd ask questions if they vanished. Ren accepted the job, and the exposure to that meteorite is what began his transformation, burns spreading across his body, vapor leaking from his skin, until the final detonation left him gone. Not dead, dissolved. Now here's the part that reframes everything. Ren wasn't the first tragedy in this story. He was the last one, the final casualty of a system that had already been quietly disposing of people for years. That system had a name. The White Center, controlled by a secret organization called Mufu, run by men hiding behind respectable titles, a Tokyo governor, a Yakuza boss, a police superintendent. They didn't just exploit workers, they erased them. Every death at that site was rewritten as a disappearance. So when Ren became something inhuman, he wasn't the monster the story wants you to fear. He was evidence, walking, breathing, or rather, vaporizing, evidence of a cover-up no one was supposed to survive. And then the show drops its biggest reveal. Kyoko was never just investigating these murders as a journalist. She found Ren again more than 20 years later in the same house they once shared, and she realized something devastating. He wasn't fully himself anymore. He existed in a frozen, statue-like state, waking only when one song played, Ellie My Love, the same song Ren once requested on the radio, back when he was still just a man with a simple life and a small ramen shop. When he wakes, he asks one question, make a wish. That's the mechanism. That's how this power actually works. And Kyoko understood it before anyone else did, which means, for a large part of this story, she was the one deciding who lived and who didn't. Not out of cruelty, out of the same thing that drives every act in this show, a wish to make the people responsible finally answer for what they did. Here's why this detail changes everything. If the human vapor were simply a monster acting on his own, this would be a straightforward thriller. Catch the killer, end the threat, roll credits. But he's not the threat, he's the weapon, and weapons don't choose their targets, the people holding them do. That reframes every murder in the show as a question, not an event. Who wished for this? What did they lose that made this feel like justice? And it exposes the real machine underneath the story. Mufu, the White Center, a network of powerful men who built their success on the backs of people they never intended to let live long enough to talk. The show even lets us watch how far that corruption reaches when the governor himself, Miura, later seizes control of Ren and uses him not for revenge, but for image, orchestrating attacks on his own staff to manufacture public sympathy. A man exploiting the very same power that was born from exploitation. That's the loop this story keeps circling back to. Those with power turn suffering into a tool, first to build the White Center, then to erase its victims, and finally to control the one being who survived it. Here's how I read the ending, and I think this is where the show is quietly asking the most out of us. When Kyoko locks herself in that vault with Ren, she's not trying to defeat him. She already knows he can't be stopped by force. What she's really doing is offering herself as the last wish, trying to absorb the violence so it stops with her, instead of spreading further. And in that final moment, as Ren surrounds her, the show flashes back to her as a child, asking him to be her father forever. That's not filler. That's the entire emotional argument of the series. Before Ren was a weapon, before he was a headline, before Mufu turned him into a symbol of fear, he was someone who chose to love a child nobody else wanted. So when Kenji reaches the vault and finds only fragments, a shoe, torn fabric, a ring never given, my interpretation is that the ending suggests Kyoko inherited Ren's abilities. The series never explicitly confirms it, but the final scene strongly points in that direction. And that final scene, a shape slowly forming in Kenji's bedroom while he sleeps, unmistakably shaped like Kyoko, isn't a jump scare. It's a continuation. My theory is that the cycle hasn't ended, it may have simply changed hands. Now here's a question a lot of you have been asking in the comments. If Kyoko really inherited Ren's powers ***, does that mean she's trapped the same way Ren was, frozen until someone plays the right song? Here's my honest take. The show never confirms it, and I don't think it wants to. What we do know is that Ren's condition wasn't just physical. It was tied to memory, to longing, to a connection strong enough to pull him back from wherever the vapor takes him. Kyoko's connection to Kenji mirrors that almost exactly. If that's true, Kenji may be the one person capable of reaching her, just as Kyoko once reached Ren. So maybe that's the real hidden layer of human vapor. It's not really about a man who can turn into gas. It's about how easily powerful people turn other human beings into something disposable, and how love is sometimes the only thing strong enough to survive that. If this breakdown helped you see the ending differently, hit subscribe. Movizo drops new deep dives every week, and there's a lot more hiding in this story we haven't even touched yet. Drop your own theory about that final scene in the comments. I read every one. Until next time, stay curious.